An evolutionary explanation of human reason is endorsed in Robert Nozick's recent book, The Nature of Rationality. What he says belongs to the genre of naturalized epistemology, but he uses the evolutionary hypothesis to explain certain limitations on reason as well as its successes. He proposes a reversal of the Kantian dependence of the facts on reason, namely, quote, that it is reason that is the dependent variable, shaped by the facts, and its dependence upon the facts explains the correlation and correspondence between them. It is just such an alternative that our evolutionary hypothesis presents, his evolutionary hypothesis. Reason tells us about reality because reality shapes reason, selecting for what seems evident. End of quote. Though its full development is extremely interesting, I won't be concerned with the details of Nozick's hypothesis, only with its status. Here is his meta-comment, quote, the evolutionary explanation itself is something we arrive at, in part, by the use of reason to support evolutionary theory in general and also this particular application of it. Hence, it does not provide a reason-independent justification of reason, and although it grounds reason in facts independent of reason, this grounding is not accepted by us independently of our reason. Hence, the account is not part of first philosophy, it is part of our current ongoing scientific view, end quote. Nozick is operating here with an idea of the facts and reality as being what they are independently of what we think, and I shall follow him in this. He insists that our finding something self-evident is no guarantee that it is necessarily true or true at all, since the disposition to find it self-evident could have been an evolutionary adaptation to its being only approximately and contingently true. The proposal is supposed to be an explanation of reason, but not a justification of it. Although it grounds reason in certain evolutionary facts, this is a causal grounding only. Those facts are not supposed to provide us with grounds for accepting the validity or reliability of reason. So the explanation is not circular. But what is it intended to provide? It seems to be a proposal of a possible naturalistic explanation of the existence of reason, which would, if it were true, make our reliance on reason objectively reasonable, that is, a reliable way of getting at the truth, allowing for the equally important function of reason in correcting and improving its own methods. But is the hypothesis really compatible with continued confidence in reason as a source of knowledge about the non-apparent character of the world? In itself, I believe an evolutionary story tells against such confidence. Without something more, the idea that our rational capacity was the product of natural selection would render reasoning far less trustworthy than Nozick suggests, beyond its original coping functions. There would be no reason to trust its results in mathematics and science, for example. And insofar as the evolutionary hypothesis itself depends on reason, it would be self-undermining. Unless it is coupled with an independent basis for confidence in reason, the evolutionary hypothesis is threatening rather than reassuring. It is consistent with continued confidence only if it amounts to the hypothesis that evolution has led to the existence of creatures, namely us, with a capacity for reasoning in whose validity we can have much stronger confidence than would be warranted merely from its having come into existence in that way. I have to be able to believe that the evolutionary explanation is consistent with the proposition that I follow the rules of logic because they are correct, not merely because I am biologically programmed to do so. But to believe that, I have to be justified independently in believing that they are correct. And this I cannot be on the basis merely of my contingent psychological disposition, together with the hypothesis that it is the product of natural selection. I can have no justification for trusting a reasoning capacity I have as a consequence of natural selection unless I am justified in trusting it simply in itself. That is, believing what it tells me in virtue of the content of the arguments it delivers. If reason is in this way self-justifying, then it is open to us also to speculate that natural selection played a role in the evolution and survival of a species that is capable of understanding and engaging in it. But the recognition of logical arguments as independently valid is a precondition of the acceptability of any evolutionary story about the source of that recognition. This means that the evolutionary hypothesis is acceptable only if reason does not need its support. At most, it may show why the existence of reason need not be biologically mysterious. The only form that genuine reasoning can take consists in seeing the validity of the arguments in virtue of what they say. As soon as one tries to step outside of such thoughts, one loses contact with their true content. And one cannot be outside and inside them at the same time. If one thinks in logic, one cannot simultaneously regard those thoughts as mere psychological dispositions, however caused or however biologically grounded. If one decides that some of one's psychological dispositions are, as a contingent matter of fact, reliable methods of reaching the truth, as one may with perception, for example, then in doing so, one must rely on other thoughts that one actually thinks, without regarding them as mere dispositions. One cannot embed all one's reasoning in a psychological theory, including the reasonings that have led to that psychological theory. The epistemological buck must stop somewhere. By this I mean not that there must be some premises that are forever unrevisable, but rather that in any process of reasoning or argument there must be some thoughts that one simply thinks from the inside, rather than thinking of them as biologically programmed dispositions. So my conclusion about an evolutionary explanation of rationality is that it is necessarily incomplete. Even if one believes it, one has to believe in the independent validity of the reasoning that is the result. The reliance we put on our reason implies a belief that even though the existence of human beings, and of ourselves in particular, is the result of a long sequence of physical and biological accidents, and even though there might never have come to be any intelligent creatures at all, nevertheless, the basic methods of reasoning we employ are not merely human, but belong to a more general category of mind. Human minds now exemplify it, but those same methods and arguments would have to be among the capacities of any species that had evolved to the level of thinking, even if there were no vertebrates and a civilization of mollusks or arthropods ruled the earth. It is natural to look for a way in which our understanding of the world could close over itself by including us and our methods of thought and understanding within its scope. That is what drives the search for naturalistic accounts of reasoning. But it is also clear that this hope cannot be realized because the primary position will always be occupied by our employment of reason and the understanding, and that will be true even when we make reasoning the object of our investigation. So an external understanding of reason has, as merely another natural phenomenon, a biological product, for example, is impossible. Reason is whatever we find we must use to understand anything, including itself. And if we try to understand it merely as a natural, biological, or psychological phenomenon, the result will be an account incompatible with our use of it and the understanding of it we have in using it. For I cannot trust a natural process unless I can see why it is reliable, any more than I can trust a mechanical algorithm unless I can see why it is reliable. And to see that, I must rely on reason itself. Once we enter the world for our temporary stay in it, there is no alternative but to try to decide what to believe and how to live. And the only way to do that is by trying to decide what is the case and what is right. Even if we distance ourselves from some of our thoughts and impulses and regard them from outside, the process of trying to place ourselves in the world leads eventually to thoughts that we cannot think of as merely ours. We must, if we think at all, think of ourselves individually and collectively as submitting to the order of reasons rather than creating it.